Welcome to Insights for Manufacturing, the podcast that supports the UK manufacturing sector. Hosted by Jeff Beecham, the manufacturer's recruiter. Hello and welcome to Insights for Manufacturing. I'm delighted to welcome my guest today, Jack Semple, Secretary of EAMA, which is the Engineering and Machinery Alliance. Good to have you on the show, Jack. How are you today?
I'm very well, thanks, Jeff. I'm very pleased to be here, and I commend you on these podcasts. I think they're great. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, it's going to be a very, very interesting discussion today. Just before we get into the sort of questions for the benefit of the audience who aren't familiar with EAMA, the Engineering and Machinery Alliance, it's an alliance of trade associations working with government and others to strengthen the machinery and component supply chain in the UK. So we'll talk about the range of members shortly. But first, Jack, let's kick things off by reflecting on a topic that's close to both our hearts and most of the people in our respective networks, I guess. In February 2022, the government identified a new imperative to reverse the historic decline in manufacturing in the UK. In April, Bayes Minister Lee Rowley promised a manufacturing investment prospectus, which was essentially a drawing together of the disparate measures already in place. So, Jack, the million-dollar question, what's actually happened since then?
Well, we've had a general election, not a general election, a leadership election, a new Prime Minister, a new government, and a new Chancellor, and a new Business Secretary is the short answer, of course, but I think it's a fascinating question, Jeff. This new imperative came in one line in the Levelling Up white paper in February. Yeah, and rather stands out in a short paragraph. There isn't anything else about it in the white paper. There's not a lot else in government policy, hence the manufacturing investment prospectus. The position of manufacturing in UK government policy has been uncertain for a very long time, so it was great to see that line in the Levelling Up white paper, which we must remember was the Johnson government's flagship policy. So therefore, that commitment has to be taken as very strong. What we needed to see was what lay behind it. With the new government, I think the priority is to see, does the new government recognise the importance of manufacturing? Does the government restate that imperative? Because it says we must reverse the decline.
Yeah.
And then what are we going to see to support it? And I think in terms of the importance of manufacturing, if I could just take a moment, because one of the EAMA's members, the Manufacturing Technologies Association, really sparked the debate in that area 4 years ago with a report that it commissioned from Oxford Economics, which highlighted how manufacturing, while only about 10% of GDP directly, actually accounts for 23% of GDP in the UK, because of all the knock-on direct and indirect effect it has with suppliers. And that led to a further report by the Institute for Manufacturing at University of Cambridge, for Bayes itself, talking about how manufacturing fits into the infrastructure and everything from research and innovation through to marketing and logistics, and how manufacturing can have various values in terms of profitability and so on itself, but how important it was to all the other aspects. But we never had that imperative to rebuild manufacturing, which has been on a long, slow decline. So really a key question is, how can we move forward? I think that's a really vital point for the new Prime Minister and the new Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, who of course was the Business Secretary. I'd like to talk about kettles for a second in that regard, because I'm not sure that we've got the terminology around manufacturing quite right. We talk about advanced manufacturing and other manufacturing. And as we know, manufacturing is a very diverse, it's a very, very, very broad church. However, Boris Johnson, recently in his last speech as Prime Minister, got into trouble for talking about kettles and how you should buy a £20 kettle to save £10 each year. Now, I thought, given that he was talking about Sizewell C, I thought the criticism was a little bit unfair on that occasion. But the issue for me is not whether we should go and buy a kettle, but who makes the kettles. And so if you think about the kettle analogy, because it was so prominent with Boris Johnson, do we just focus on a few narrow sectors like space and aerospace, healthcare, automotive, or are we going to take a broader sweep view of manufacturing? And I'm very interested, a number of other countries view advanced manufacturing as being relevant to everybody, because it's not what you make, it's how you make it.
Absolutely.
And yes, some things like aero engines and aircraft wings and so on are always going to be very sophisticated things to manufacture. But all manufacturing could be advanced if it's using the latest up-to-date efficient methods of doing so. And bringing design, building in design into how you make it. And so if you think about what some people call Industry 4, how can we bring Industry 4 not only into those, if you like, sexy areas of manufacturing, but into all manufacturing? And how can we re-envisage manufacturing? And if I can envisage manufacturing catapult, which is largely funded directly and indirectly by BEIS, has a vision to double manufacturing by 2030, from 10% to 20%. Now, that's not agreed with BEIS, because I asked earlier in the year, and we don't have a figure from the last government or the new government. The essential point about where does manufacturing fit? Is it central to our economic resilience, our growth, which the Prime Minister is absolutely focused on, to levelling up, to net zero, which is our long-term aim? Yep. All these things, manufacturing is very important too. And interestingly, I think Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland all have much more of a plan for manufacturing and advanced engineering than England does. So do other countries. And Singapore, which people often talk about as being a leader in financial services and service industries, and you read in the papers about how the UK might be Singapore on Thames to promote financial services. 20% of the Singapore economy is manufacturing, and they have a plan to raise that to 30% by 2030. So where's the plan for the UK? And so that is the real challenge and focus for, I think, for our sector, for this government, about manufacturing and the advanced engineering services that go around that.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that, Jack. And, you know, I think we need what's the word? I think we need a renaissance, don't we? A renaissance of UK manufacturing for all the reasons, you know, we've discussed. The supply chain disruption more recently has caused huge problems. That's just one area. And I think it's that understanding of the government as to how important and intrinsic manufacturing is to our, not just the economy, but our country as a whole. You know, there's a lot of tradition and heritage in manufacturing and engineering in the UK. And there's a lot of opportunity, isn't there? It's just, you know, we need a joined up approach, and we need to grasp, you know, the opportunity for what the future holds. So it's going to be interesting to see how things roll out.
To be fair to the government, it's not just for government, of course, it's for business and industry as well.
Yeah.
Tucker Suleiman, who appears on Dragon's Den, said something on a program 2.5 years ago that has stuck with me very much. One of the people looking for investment money was looking for some lower cost and higher quality manufacturing. And Tucker Suleiman said, I have a team in China. And where is our mentality? Where is our I have a team in the UK? Yeah. Where's the mentality among OEMs and Tier 1s to explore what's in the UK, to understand the UK supply chain? Where can they go to find those solutions? But where's even the mentality to start in the UK? I have myself heard companies at shows coming up looking for supply chain solutions for suppliers, and said, "Oh, do you only recommend?" This is to EAMA members. Do you only recommend companies in the UK? I was looking for the Far East. So we need a mentality shift in large companies. There are some networks and little groups who will work together, but we need to expand that mentality. What I call the Tucker-Sullivan index. Where's the team in the UK? Where's the mentality in the UK? At the moment, it's not the index isn't as high as it needs to be.
That's a really good point, Jack, and thanks for sharing that. It's almost like we've got to break that habit. A lot of the big companies have just got into that habit, I guess, of cost down, so outsourcing, low cost countries, and it's just been, we're decades into that. It's almost become the norm, hasn't it? So it's been breaking that habit.
It's starting to change. It's starting to change. I've been really encouraged to hear of companies with the high shipping costs and the delays, companies that have started making not only their regular lines, but increasingly high volume, low margin pieces. There is definitely a move towards reshoring. We need to build on that. We need to secure what we've got where we can, based on quality and competitiveness, and a good business case, and build on that.
Absolutely. So just focusing on EAMA for a second then, Jack. So your members currently include the following. We've got the Agricultural Engineers Association, the British Compressed Air Society, British Fluid Power Association, British Plastics Federation, British Turn Parts Manufacturers Association. We've got Gambika, Gauge and Toolmakers Association, Manufacturing Technologies Association, the Printing Industry Confederation, and then the Solids Handling and Processing Association. Have I missed any? Are there any newer sort of members, or
no? Those are our lead. Those are our lead members. We're very happy to take on others. I think the characteristic is that they're all in the machinery and component supply chain. I think that's the best definition we can have. So we've got the manufacturing technologies providers, through to tier 3 and 4 machining subcontractors. Gambika, by the way, includes automation, control, and laboratory systems, but it got so many different things they just compressed it. But the others are fairly self-explanatory.
Okay, and can you give a brief overview, Jack, of the sort of aims of EAMA, and how, with a collective voice to government, because I know you sort of act as the sort of middle party in sort of talks between these trade bodies and the government, how EAMA members and the companies they represent can grow and evolve and thrive.
So it's a broad church again within the machinery and component supply chain. These are independent trade associations who are in alliance rather than a federation, if I could say that. EAMA's role is to help them to support their members, and that's mostly but not exclusively as a conduit to and from government. So relaying to them what government's planning, and feeding in or representing or lobbying on their behalf. Some of the members additionally have their own contacts in government, others less so. So I spend my time dealing mostly with Business Department, International Trade, Treasury, and Department for Education would be my core audience. And the key point is to ensure that in the area of policy and government, what government's doing and what it's thinking about and what's proposing, that our members are aware so that they can inform their members and get their feedback. And so that's our role to strengthen the supply chain. The membership is predominantly SMEs, but we have large companies. I'll miss some out, no doubt, but Renishaw, Siemens, JCB, big companies in membership, but our focus is more on SMEs.
What are your members saying about the current energy crisis, Jack? I mean, this is a huge issue at the moment. So what feedback are you getting at the moment?
Well, we've been, I think, a lot of trade bodies have been surveying their members as to what their view is, and EAMA is no exception. Energy is, for many of our members, the critical issue at the moment. It's really interesting to see the different positions of companies. They're not all in the same position, other than they're all worried about it. So they have different contracts ending at different times. A lot of companies are seeing increases, typically 2 to 4 or 5 times their energy costs, in some cases more than that. But the average seems to be about 2.5 to 3%. They're all working to do what they can to pass on costs, of course. Energy, for some, is just the latest big increase in costs that they've had, but but for a lot of companies, it's the most alarming. There's a determination and a requirement to pass on the costs wherever they can, and I think it's really that's going to be a really interesting dynamic. We're waiting to see what the government is going to do, of course. So as we speak, we've had the announcement, but no detail as yet, other than whatever support is going to be available for the first 6 months will be backdated. There's going to be a review by Jacob Rees-Mogg as to what the energy support will be after the first 6 months for businesses. Also, I think it's really interesting to note the extent to which companies are taking action themselves, which is not a surprise. EAMA's trade associations, they're really important, if you like, national clusters of capability within their sector. So we hear a lot about regional clusters from government and regional and local groups, which are very, very important. But I think from the trade association's point of view and from the national point of view, having a UK-wide national view on a lot of issues, including energy, is really important. They've been a great conduit, a great networking opportunity for firms to learn about what others are doing. And there's a lot of that going on at the moment as well.
What would you like to see happen to support manufacturing businesses more on energy at the moment, Jack?
I think this is one of the most difficult challenges for government, and without being a great expert in energy, I wouldn't go into a huge amount of detail. But I think the reality is that we've had a short-term surge. I support the government's support for business, but I think, and this is a difficult point to make, but I think, again, if you look at the importance of manufacturing businesses are particularly important to support. And why is that? Because they're competing in international markets. Same is true of some other sectors, so the same would apply to them. Once lost, the jobs, the intellectual property, the taxes are very difficult to regain. Think of the efforts that government puts into attracting inward investment into the UK. So it's absolutely critical that we support manufacturing business for those reasons. Also, as we've just talked about the supply chain issues and the support among companies is complex, a mutually supportive environment in many ways. So we want to maintain the companies, the infrastructure and the ecosystem, if you like, for manufacturing, which is more complex than in many other industries. And so the case that I'm making to government is that it's absolutely vital that's recognised and that we support manufacturing companies to get through what is hopefully a short-term surge in energy costs.
Absolutely. Well, I know from our sort of previous conversation a week or so ago, we talked about the topic of solar energy, and solar panels that seem to be having a bit of a renaissance themselves, particularly for businesses. And I know that there's a business not too far away from where I live in Birmingham, Certec, they're a metal pressings company, I think, that supply the automotive industry. They're in Coleshill. And, they've invested in a huge array of solar panels on their factory roof, which is going to cut their bill and, sort of reduce CO2 emissions dramatically. Is this a strategy that you're actually talking to UK government about, Jack? And what support is there for businesses to invest in solar roofing?
The example you've just mentioned, Jeff, is one I've come across often. I think it's really significant that privately owned UK-based SME manufacturers have been investing in solar roofing as a sound financial investment. Now, it may or may not have long-term carbon net zero credential value as well, but companies have been investing in it even before the energy surge as a sound long-term investment. And I've been making that point to government. My own view, which I know is shared by the companies that have been putting solar panels on, is that government needs to get its act together on this and regulate. And I know they don't like regulating on anything, but regulate for new buildings to have solar roofing.
Yes.
Because if it makes sense for a privately owned company to invest in the long term, then it must make sense for the economy as a whole, because leased properties are going to be much less likely to invest. If we're serious about net zero, why wouldn't we? We require buildings to have certain levels of insulation, groundworks and so on, foundations. It should be a requirement. There's great opportunities for design and manufacturing in that as well. It's a new opportunity. Globally, I can't believe it's not going to be a growth market. It cuts your transmission losses. I read a letter in the Times last week about how British fields were blossoming with solar panels. It seems daft when we can have new developments. Surely they should be part of the ecosystem. And to adapt a Thatcherite phrase, we could have an energy producing democracy. The only people who wouldn't like it perhaps are the big energy companies. But,
absolutely.
But I think if the government doesn't think that's a good idea, I think given all the history of subsidies and so on, it needs to explain why regulating for new buildings isn't a good idea.
Yeah, that makes sense. So moving on to skills, Jack, what are your members needing support with the most? I mean, we've had the apprenticeship levy, there's mixed feelings about whether that's been a failure or not. We've got the T levels. What are the main issues at the moment, and what's the way forward as far as you're concerned?
We talk mostly about England, simply because we don't have the bandwidth to talk about Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and there's a lot going on in England. If we start with the levy, which is what most of the public debate seems to be about in terms of workplace skills.
Yeah,
I think in our sector, it's a bit of a mixed blessing. So, to me, the levy is an issue about tax and large company budgets. It's not fundamentally a skills issue. The fundamental skills issue is the decline in the infrastructure of third-party training for SMEs, most of whom either don't pay the levy or don't pay very much. I think the levy has generated additional net gain to the Treasury because it hasn't been disseminated to SMEs as much, for whatever reason, as it might have been. So there are huge issues at every level of the skills agenda, from getting people interested in engineering as school children to right up to level 6 and 7 apprenticeships. It's really interesting. If you look at the Institutes of Technology, we're set up to boost level 4 and 5 apprenticeship. They've gone right back to schools in some cases to get the pipeline to come through. I think there's a lot of streamlining and clarity needs to be brought to what I think is regarded as the integrated skill system. Maybe integrated, but I think it's confusing. It's difficult to access. The businesses themselves, I think, have a huge role to play in helping themselves. We have within EAMA's membership a number of companies that I know of personally who have of all sizes. So we're not just talking about the large companies like Renishaw and JCB and so on, but SMEs who have gone into the local community and have talked about engineering, talked about their company, and they don't have any difficulty in recruiting people into their business. I appreciate that's not possible for all firms, but I would encourage more companies to reflect on what they do and how they project themselves and to go into the local community and schools and raise their profile. They'll raise the profile of engineering generally, and they'll raise the profile of their own business as well. I think you mentioned T-levels. We're working with the Department for Education, doing a lot of work on that. Their new qualification that the government is bringing in for 16 and 19-year-olds. It's a 2-year course, and we're already seeing courses in health. We've already had courses in healthcare, digital and construction. Engineering and manufacturing starts this September. And the key issue for companies is, will they offer a 45-day placement for students? So the difficulty there is it's neither a 1 or 2 week work placement nor a full-blown apprenticeship where you really get geared up for it. We need to raise awareness and understanding, and I think it's going to be a bit of a slow burn, personally. But I think there are opportunities there.
Do you think there's a sort of broad enough range of T-levels, that are planned at the moment to support the needs of UK manufacturing and engineering? I mean, I had a look on the website yesterday, and there seemed to be a small bandwidth of T-levels that would cover sort of manufacturing and engineering. Our business is going to sort of slip through those gaps because it's not broad enough, or I guess it's a complex thing.
I think if we get the existing T-levels understood and adopted and crack this 45-day placement issue, I think if there are gaps, we can address them as we go forward. But I think the key point is to get the ones that exist understood and working, and then there will be a natural evolution, would be my guess.
Absolutely. So moving on to another really important topic, something that I spoke about in the inaugural episode of Insights for Manufacturing back in February, I think it was, with Terry Schooler, Brexit, international trade. So, Jack, as you know, I'm a huge advocate of reshoring and increasing opportunities for UK manufacturers and the local supply chain. But we also need global trade, for products, materials, services that we just don't have here in the UK. So, we need to grow a much bigger export book, really. And I know some businesses have that sort of nervousness or trepidation if they haven't gone down the export route before. What are the key issues that you're seeing, and where should efforts be prioritised?
I think exporting it's well known that exporting benefits businesses, and we see great benefits there. I was talking to a member just yesterday about a firm that's absolutely leading edge in its support for materials handling and processing in food, pharmaceuticals, and chemicals. And it's in the UK and Europe, and it can also sell either those technologies or different technologies for different parts of the world, depending on their need. I think the key point, as far as government is concerned, and again, that's where I'm primarily concerned with, is we've seen a narrowing of ambition in our exports, as I would interpret it, a focus on a few sectors. And to get back to the point about the renaissance in manufacturing, I think we need a broader approach. And I'd very much like to see that. Department for International Trade closed down a number of its groups, including advanced engineering last year. It's shrunk its ambition for exporting from growing its proportion of GDP to a much more easily achieved nominal target by 2030. So I think there are some questions around that and government support at this time of difficult cost. I would encourage firms to take advantage of the internationalization fund while it still exists, which can be really useful in supporting marketing plans, developing your know-how for exporting. Also, the trade associations, certainly within EAMA, and I know others, can support you getting into the exporting markets, as well as the Department for International Trade, of course. If we look to the future, I think we've got very interesting trade negotiations, particularly with India. I think may be the next one that we see agreement on. With the EU, well, we've got time to start talking about the EU. I'm not sure. It'd be really interesting to see where the EU relationship develops. But from our point of view, no surprise, it's our biggest market. It's on our doorstep.
Yeah.
We have the supply chains, and whatever the politics, the business-to-business relationships have to work and be facilitated.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm just thinking recently, with a lot of the components coming in traditionally from sort of China and the Far East, maybe there's a way for the UK and EU relationship to sort of smooth itself out a little bit by, let's reshore as much as we can, but outside of that, we could almost, I think I've seen a term on the internet the other day, nearshoring. So maybe let's not get so much stuff from made in China. Let's use some of our European friends and neighbours, and so at least you're dramatically reducing that distance and the length of the supply chain. So maybe there are opportunities for us to procure products and materials from Europe a little bit more than China, perhaps, and maybe that might help the relationship a little bit as well.
I think that's the reality of what companies are looking to do.
Yeah.
So I think we need to facilitate that. And the more we get away from the Brexit rhetoric, defining ourselves by not being in EU, the better it'll be for global Britain, actually.
Yeah. So just quickly, we spoke about energy earlier. So carbon net zero, huge topic. It affects everyone. EAMA has signed up to the SME Climate Hub and is a member of the Climate Action for Associations. What are the biggest challenges currently for UK manufacturing, and what are your members doing, Jack, in terms of providing support or research or even events for businesses that they represent, in terms of carbon net zero?
I think they're all taking their own approach. Each member is going to be doing something a little bit differently. But if I could just take a couple of examples, with apologies to everybody else. The British Plastics Federation. Now, plastics is a sector that fits just underneath the formal intensive energy users, but their members use a lot of energy. It's got a climate change agreement with BEIS, which it's had since 2008. So it's doing a lot to encourage its members to take action on climate. It's got 500 of its members, more than 500 signed up now. At the end of last year, it set up a net zero committee, which is to look at that particularly. And I think that's got a really interesting mix of companies and individuals sitting on it. But interestingly, they've been doing this since 1972. They set up an environment committee. So this, the climate committee or the sustainability committee has precedents going back 50 years. And so there's nothing new under the sun, as it were. But more seriously, I think that there's a renewed impetus in that area, and they have a number of activities around that. I think also, if I could mention the British Compressed Air Society's Task Force 10. Now, compressed air accounts for 10% of all the electricity used in the UK industry, powers compressors.
Wow.
BCAS and its members reckon 1/3 of that, and therefore, 3% of all industrial electricity used could be saved with a combination of the right specification of equipment and the right operation and maintenance, because there's a lot of energy lost through leakage, and we're starting to see more innovative solutions about capturing heat loss, switching off compressors when they're not needed more, and I would. BCAS is really interesting because they're reaching out. Right, if you think their members supply absolutely everything from nuclear power stations to dentists, and they're reaching out across the economy to the users as well as their own members on behalf of their members. And if you go onto the BCAS website on BCAS Task Force 10, you're starting to see examples of actions taken by companies, some of which are named, some of which are just the type of company they are, to address that specific area, because there's so much that companies can do, and there's a willingness to take action. So I think really it's an awareness of what actions can be taken and examples that disseminating now.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that, Jack. You're familiar with the campaign and the petition for a Minister for Manufacturing, founded by Andrea Wilson at Honall Precision. What impact could a Minister for Manufacturing have for UK manufacturing SMEs, in your opinion?
I think Andrea is doing a great job in highlighting that issue. We've had a minister responsible for advanced manufacturing before, Lee Rowley, who was one of the resignations. I think whatever it's called, and I think we might get, for example, a Minister for Industry in the new government. The ministerial titles and responsibilities have to be agreed.
Yeah.
One of the problems with manufacturing is its diversity and the number of different departments who've got an interest. Whatever the person is called, I think it's what's needed most is the recognition of its importance and the commitment to action across the spectrum. And that's certainly what EAMA and I know others are and will be urging on the new government. And with an exercise earlier in the year around Make UK's, around about the time of the National Manufacturing Day, I think it's a great time to politicise manufacturing with a small p. And again, I would encourage companies to get in touch with a local MP and other influencers, invite them in if they like, and explain to them, and with EAMA members we can support this, explain to them why it matters, why manufacturing matters, and just give them an understanding, because if you don't come from this background, you perhaps don't realise. And we need to get to a position where not only do the government say manufacturing matters, but MPs are saying, what are you doing to support manufacturing? Because did you know it's important for these reasons?
Yeah. So it's important to have that local understanding and support, as well as in.
I think so, and it can be quite a nice exercise for the company itself.
Yeah.
To actually think, where do we fit in? We're not just making things. We're not just doing sums, if you like, the engineering. We are enabling people to travel. We're enabling people to get healthy. We're enabling people in other parts of the world to get water. It's a different mindset. Engineers have a tendency, and I know this from my own past, can have a tendency to think in terms of products and sums rather than what they're enabling people to do and the benefits that brings to people's lives. And that is going to become more and more important for the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not least in recruitment, actually, because young people want to know, what is the value that you as a company are bringing? So what is all the value also that we're bringing to the economy?
Yeah, the purpose of a business and its why, in effect, isn't it? What value is that business adding to the community and around the world?
Actually, it can make a really interesting boardroom discussion.
Absolutely.
What are we about? Why do people want to come and work for us, for example? If you look at the average manufacturer's website, there can be, I'm talking about SMEs, for example, there can be a lot about what they do and what they make, but they tend to put the recruitment bit out to the personal manager or the HR manager who's interested in regulation and form filling, and there isn't the same sparkle about why somebody would want to go and work there. That's starting to change, but the more we can get that into the business, I think the more the sector will thrive.
Yeah, I think there's a huge responsibility for the manufacturers to really showcase themselves, and that lies with them, doesn't it? You can give them the tools and the techniques and support, but they've got to be, manufacturers are, they're great at making things, they're great at designing things, but not always so good at, talking up what they do, and as you just said, why they do it, who actually benefits from our products and services. So really good point.
They need to engineer the message.
Yes. I think, can we copyright that phrase? Engineer the message. That'll be brilliant. Okay, well, so Jack, just finally, then we've had Brexit, we've had COVID, supply chain disruption, Energy Gate, if I can call it that, the war in Ukraine. it's an ever-changing landscape, and more challenges will be on the road ahead. That's just life. But what are the next challenges you're seeing for UK manufacturing in the future? What's the next sort of big risk that you and your members are maybe preparing for?
The next big risk, if everybody knew, I think that the uncertainties at the moment are what's going to be the inflation rate, what's going to be the exchange rate, and so on. I think within the industry, I think the challenges around leadership and management are a big issue. Technology adoption. We've recently published a guide which is available on the website to Industry 4.0. Now, I know at the moment it's not what most companies are thinking about. They're thinking about getting through the next few months, but looking at how they develop the culture of the business, the technology of the business. I think the adoption of so leadership and management, the adoption of robotics and automation systems. A lot of companies are needing to come into the digital age still. I think one of the interesting points of it, the Made Smarter Northwest pilot, was the extent to which companies were needing to put in ERP systems. So becoming more productive. We're working with the business department at the moment to hear from companies. I'd be delighted to hear from companies. So what steps they're taking and what they think they need to become more productive, just so that we're not just innovating the latest cutting edge technology, but we're adopting existing technology to a good level in the UK. I think that's going to be a challenge. I think there's an opportunity in some sectors, particularly composites, around the adoption of additive manufacturing. And we've got a relaunch of EAMA UK by the Manufacturing Technologies Association, which is an EAMA member, but we've got other EAMA members who have got interest in that area. It's not for everybody, but I think we're going to see that moving from prototyping into more volume production.
Yeah, absolutely.
So all those technologies, I think, how do we adopt? And I think that's an issue for companies to make the boardroom case, but it's also an issue for the government to get behind, because the amount of money that they can that would help in terms of supporting companies in that way would be infinitesimal compared with the sums we're talking about in support in other areas, but have a great return for investment.
It's almost hitting that stage where there's going to be a mass, adoption. It's been used for rapid prototyping for a number of years. But again, and this is something I was chatting to Andy Sanford about in my last podcast. Andy's the editor at Engineering Capacity. It's that challenge of businesses, adopting AM for volume. It's not very widespread from a volume perspective, and I think some of the processes and materials are still being developed, but it seems to be definitely the way forward. So it'd be interesting how that pans out. Technology is just so important.
I was only going to agree with you. It's evolving, but I think we are going to see that progression now and that shift in perception.
Yeah. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up today's episode. I hope everybody taken some nuggets of information and support away from my discussion today with Jack Semple. So thank you very much, Jack, for coming on today.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for listening, and look out for the next episode of Insights for Manufacturing. See you next time, and bye-bye.